Hello, this video is all about the Canon 5D Mark IV. I've been using this camera professionally for the last 4 years or so. I've shot hundreds of assignments with it and many thousands of frames. And this video is all about the setup, how I set the camera up, the settings that I use, the customizable buttons, and some of the bits and pieces that I use on the camera body on a day-to-day basis. Now it's my setup. It's constantly evolving, and it won't be for everybody, and there's no right or wrong way of doing these things. And so, if you have an interest in the Canon 5D Mark IV, you might find something of interest here. And equally, if you have a setting or a tip or trick that you use, then let me know, because I'm constantly evolving and I really like to learn new ways. And so leave me a comment if you have any thoughts on this. So to begin with, we'll talk about the camera strap. Now, I have used all sorts of different camera straps over the years, but I seem to always come back to Canon, the actual straps that come with the camera, mainly probably because they're free. That's always good. But also, more importantly, I like them because they've been super reliable for me. And I've been in some bizarre circumstances over the years, and I've sort of hung my body weight off of these things and got them caught in all sorts of different obstacles and had someone try to rip them off of my arm, and they've never given way. They've always held strong. So super reliable. That's important to me. And they don't have any metal parts, which is great because they don't scratch the camera or the lenses. The thing I don't like about them, I guess, is the branding. I'd really rather it was just kind of a bit more discreet. And also they're a bit tricky to get on and off of the camera, but I've become absolutely expert at getting these things on and off. I have a system and I can get it on and off in a really short period of time. The next thing I'll talk about is this thing, which is nearly always on the top of my camera. It's a flash trigger, which means I can fire my off-camera flash remotely. It's from a company called Essential Photo. I'll leave an affiliate link in the description, and you can get all different kinds of lighting from them. It's an English company. And it's basically identical to Godot, the Godot system. And the reason I like this trigger in particular, I've used all sorts over the years, but the reason I like it in particular is the range is exceptionally good and the connection is reliable. So you can fire your flash lighting from good distance and through obstacles, through walls and trees and all sorts. And also I like it because the battery life is exceptionally good, and it has a hot shoe on the top, because that means I can put an extra transmitter or a remote control on it if I need to. The only thing I don't like about it is I wish the screen was a bit brighter. So onto the back of the camera, onto the bottom of the camera, I have my Manfrotto tripod plate, which I use Manfrotto tripods, and I keep a plate on all of my cameras all the time so that I can just snap it onto a tripod as and how I need. Very sort of handy to have those things always on. And the next thing, which may be of interest to some, might not be of interest to others, is I have a Zacuto Z Finder plate, and that enables me to use the live view on this camera to take still pictures. Now, initially this thing came into my hands for shooting video, which is what most people use them for, but for the Canon 5D Mark IV, it's got such a lovely screen and the live view is so good. I use it probably half of the time for taking my still pictures, depending on what it is that I'm shooting. Now the idea is that you just snap it onto the back and it's really kind of strong, firm connection. There are other companies that make these things as well as Zacuto, and then you trigger the live view, and then you hold. I know it's a bit Frankenstein and a bit cranky. It might not be for everybody. And then you can see the screen and you can adjust your focusing points and you can take pictures and you can zoom in and out and all of that good stuff. Now this works really well for me. I find it really effective, and it's particularly if you set the camera up right for it. But I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. This won't be for everyone. Let's take that off. If you're interested in the Zacuto EVF Canon 5D Mark IV combo, kind of turning your EOS 5D Mark IV into an R5 killer. Would it be an R5 killer? Actually, you know what? Kind of is. Not quite, but you know what I mean. If you're interested in that, let me know, because I'll probably make another video all just about that, actually. So what I'm going to do now is dive into the menu and show you some of the settings that I use, some of the buttons and how I assign them, and different bits and pieces about the camera that you might find of interest. Okay, so here we go. So initially I shoot in RAW mode all of the time to both cards simultaneously. I generally use a 64GB CF card and a 64GB SD card, and I use the CF card as kind of my working card, and I keep the SD card tucked into a wallet after it's finished as a backup. So just moving down the menu system, The dual pixel raw thing, I have that disabled, not really interested in that at all. The image review, I have that set to hold, rather this is a custom setting rather than any of the others. That means that the image stays on for as long as you wish after you've taken a picture. Beep, I have that to enable because I really like the audio confirmation that I've got focus. I know it annoys some people, and on occasion I do turn it off. Release shutter without cut, certainly have that set to off most of the time. Let's move on. Anything here that's of interest? Probably not, actually. I don't want to open a can of worms and start talking about sRGB or Adobe RGB. Everyone has to make their own choice. Currently I'm shooting in sRGB mode. It's a whole nother story. Let's not get into that. White balance, I set it to auto white balance. Most of the time I use automatic white balance, and sometimes I will. You can have a preference here of choosing a sort of warm or a cooler auto white balance, and mostly I'll just leave it on the automatic one, but sometimes if using in a sort of certain circumstances I'll flick over to the other one to make a slightly cooler image. Let's move across. Picture style, most of the time I just want things to be standard, so I will use a standard picture profile and I turn nearly all of the sort of auto tone affecting things to off. So you can see that all of the different automatic settings I generally have to off. I'd much rather kind of affect the picture afterwards, after I've got a sort of pretty standard raw file from it. Live view, I have it on enable, and then the flexi zone AF. I disable my touch shutter, and I have my exposure simulation enabled, and I use the 3:2 aspect ratio all of the time. I know it's quite handy to be able to look at different crops in the, a square crop or a 16:9, but generally I'm just so pre-programmed to using the 3:2 that that's just where it stays. Silent live view shoot is very handy if you're in a really quiet environment, but I have it disabled most of the time. But if I was going to do something in a really sensitive environment, I might look at turning that on. Let's move across to the AF. I typically use case 1 for most things. In fact, 99.9% of things I use, I don't actually mess around with these settings at all. I've found them to be very accurate. And I think the problem with tweaking your autofocus, I think if you're shooting a very specific thing, then it's worth working on your settings. But I shoot so many different things that I'd rather just go with the kind of standard, know where I am with it, and it always works fine for me. Let's just move through these. Is there anything in here that's of interest? You can choose which AF points that you use inside the camera, and the camera has lots of different AF points, but I only use the cross type, and the reason for that is that they're more accurate. I find them more accurate, and I don't particularly need, I'm quite simplistic in the way that I approach things, and I do move my AF point around to the place that I want focus to be, but this particular, this cross type AF points gives me enough options at the moment, and the R5 has a lot more and is better in that way, I would have to say. But that is, let's just go back to the menu. That is something in the AF that I do. The other thing that I do is I have my orientation linked. So if I'm shooting a portrait and I've got my AF point in the sort of top third, that means when I go into landscape mode, the AF point will sort of flip back to where the person's head might be in the frame, which is actually really sort of labor saving thing. It's really handy. And let's just have a little look what else there might be in there. The AF micro adjustment, I do use that a lot, and I add all of the data for all of my lenses and I adjust them all because it makes a difference. And so I do absolutely calibrate all of my lenses. Let's move across to the next option. So I have these settings I don't use very much at all. The next one along, the only thing that I really use in here is the rating. I've got my rating button, which is a really cool thing for culling pictures if you have time on a shoot. And I have my rating button set to, if we just take a shot and then pull that picture up, and if I wanted to rate it, I can just press it once and it rates it as a 1 star. If I press it 2 or 3 or 4 times, it keeps changing the rating number for me. And what that means is when I get back into post-production, I have my Lightroom and my photo mechanics set up so they can recognize that, and it helps me with my culling process. Nothing else there, I don't think. My highlight alerts and all of those things I just disable. And magnification is when I want to go in on the image and I have it set to 2 times. I typically set all of the brightnesses at sort of average and that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is all about what happens with the pictures on the card. So in here I have record to multiple so that the pictures go into both cards, and I have continuous numbering, and sometimes you might need to reset that, but I like to have all of my files continuously numbered. And then I change my file name to something that is unique to me. My auto rotate I have on for camera and computer, so that means that when I look back over the pictures they are rotated on the screen and also on the computer when you go back to it. Let's just go through the next set of menus. So auto power off, I disable that. I know that it kills the battery from time to time. Date and time, I'm really fastidious about this, and I make sure that all of my cameras are set together. I set them kind of before a big shoot. I will set all of this information very accurately so that when I bring all of my pictures, let's say into Lightroom, I can, if necessary, sort them by time capture, and it's really important, and I really value being able to do that. Is there anything here? Touch control, just standard. And then we get into the sort of custom setup where maybe this might start to get interesting, but we'll just go through this one first. My exposure level increments I do in 1/3 of a stop, and there's nothing that interesting there, I don't think. Over onto the next shutter speed range, I just leave all of this as it comes in the as it comes factory set. Okay, so we're now into this sort of star, which is your my menu, and that's, I set this up differently from shoot to shoot actually, but most often than not I have a few things. I have my sensor cleaning in there, and the great thing about this is that when you bring up the menu you can just go straight to the star and get your kind of most used items, I guess, and you can configure it whichever way you like. And the 3 things that I seem to continuously have in here, even though I change them around, I have my format card, my sensor cleaning, and my battery info. The battery info is really cool because I've got quite a lot of different batteries, and it just enables me to kind of keep up with which batteries are performing well and which ones are kind of looking a little bit dodge, if that might be the problem. And the sensor cleaning, I use that all the time to just kind of go through and just clean my sensor in between takes, in between shots, and it's really nice to be able to access it. I know you can do it by turning the camera off and on, but I do both, to be perfectly honest. And the format card is really nice because it's there and you don't have to go searching around for it. So let's get into the custom controls. So this is where it gets interesting with this camera, where you get the option to change different buttons around to do different things. And I constantly fiddle with this and then sort of get something that works for me for a while, and then I will fiddle around with it again depending on what it is that I'm doing. So I'm a back button focuser. I have been for many years. There's no right or wrong way, but what I typically do is disable the AF off of the shutter button and then assign it to the this button here on the back, which you can, as you flick through here, you can see that my AF is on. So when I press that button, the AF will fire up. I change the depth of field preview button to the depth of field preview button, and that's exceptionally good in live view. So when you go into live view mode, you're typically seeing the image the shot through the lens wide open, let's say. So when I press my depth of field preview, because I'm at f4 and that's the maximum aperture on this lens, nothing is changing. Whereas if I was to stop down to, let's say, f22, and then kind of make my exposure correct. And then I press my depth of field preview button. You can see that everything, let's do that slightly differently so that you can actually, if I zoom in a little bit on and put my focus into, where should we put the focus? On the Olympus camera. Okay, if I press the depth of field preview button, you will see the man in the background snaps into focus. And so that is really handy on live view, because it means that you can, while you're looking through, particularly with the Zacuto Z Finder, it means that you can see what's going on with your aperture effect. So it makes it very much like a mirrorless camera. Okay, so next, turn that off. We're going here. Let's have a look at some other things that, you know, for a long time I had my depth of field preview button set to change my AI servo over onto, from AI servo in one shot, and that worked really well. But since I've been using the live view more, I keep that depth of field preview button to do what it was intended for. And actually, if we go up here, you will see that this button now I've set to change between AI servo and one shot. And it's particularly cool because if you're in one shot and you're, let's say, shooting portraits of people and you're going bink, get focus, snap, bink, get focus, and you're quite happy with that. And let's say you're photographing a child and the child suddenly starts running towards your camera, and let's say you're on a 200mm lens. You really want to be in servo mode, but if you're going to have to put the camera down and press the button to change it to servo mode and then start taking pictures, you're going to miss the shot. And if you shoot in one shot, you're likely to have an out of focus picture. But what having the button up here set to servo means that I can actually put my thumb onto that button and then actually hit the focus button as well. So I've got quite big thumbs, so it goes in there and then I've instantly got servo mode, which is really cool. So I can be shooting away, taking pictures, focusing with that, and then someone starts running towards me and I just roll my thumb over and press both buttons down with my thumb. Not everyone will have thumbs big enough to do this, or lumpy enough to do this, but that's how I do it. Let's have another look at some of the other settings that we have in here. So the next thing that I have is, I don't have anything different with that. This little button up here I just have disabled. Now the set button has always been my favorite button of all to customize because it just fits the thumb so perfectly. And for ages and many times I will use the set button to set my ISO, because that is a really lovely way of changing your ISO. You just kind of hold that button down and just change, and it's a great way of doing it. It's the best button. I love the set button. These days I tend to use it more for a zoom, and what that means is that when I'm shooting, when I pull up a picture, if I want to zoom in on it, I just press once and then I instantly get my focus. Rather than having to go up here, and it just like is another button that you can't find. And also in live view, if you're shooting, let's open up a little bit and stop down our exposure. Let's say you're shooting and you want to magnify that spot where your AF point is, you can just press this button and there you go, you get your, and if you go another press, you can get to 10 times, and that's really handy because it enables you to, you know, just check for critical focus. It particularly works well with that Zacuto Z Finder, but in many cases it's just a kind of really lovely use of the set button, I find. So all the TV and the AV, I leave all of that as natural as possibly can be, and I use this up here to this multi dongle thing, whatever it's called, will move my AF point if I need to. And I have it set so that when I press it in the middle, it recenters the AF point. Let's have another look inside, and there's just one other thing I think that I have, which is this little new button, which has not really been kind of new around for Canon cameras before. I have that set to alter my autofocus zone. So if I want to go from just having one spot to multiple spots. That's how I control those. Now, it's not quite right, and I think one of the problems that I struggle with this camera is that I'm really drawn to the set button all the time, and I kind of want another set button somewhere because I'd really like to have my ISO here. I'd like to keep that as my AF point selector, but then it'd be really nice to have another button for zoom somewhere. I know you've got it here, but it just doesn't seem to quite fall naturally for me, especially when I'm using my Frankenstein EVF. Now the lock button down here, you can set that to do various different things. I don't use it hardly at all, but one of the good things that you can use it for is to lock the touch screen if you don't want the touch screen to be on for whatever reason. Now I'll go back into the menu and just see if there's anything that I've missed. I don't think there is. I really hope that's been of some use to you, seeing my settings. Feels kind of like that. Oh, there's one thing that I should mention, and that is the, let's just turn the camera over. We have this C1, C2 and C3 setting up here. And I've only really started using those in the last year or so. And the idea is that you can take all of your settings, whatever the settings are for all of the different setup on the camera, and you can assign them to one of these buttons. So, for example, if I wanted to have full manual exposure with my ISO button here rather than the zoom, and set everything up differently with, let's say, not back button focus but front button focus and whatever else it is that you can think of, I could set all of that up and then put it onto and then save it in C1, and then that will save those settings. And then as soon as I kind of go back to normal, then the old settings will revert. And it can be quite useful. It's worth looking into if you've got one of these cameras. It can be ever so, you know, always, I'm one of those people that like to keep things really simple. And these C1, C2 and C3 buttons can make things easier, but they also can add a certain level of complexity, because once you're in one of those modes, you can't easily change there's things that you can't easily change. And so I'm a manual shooter, so I quite often just like leaving it all manual and simple, but it might be worth looking into if you have one of these cameras and you're interested. I hope that this has been of some use to you. Thank you very much, and do subscribe if you like this kind of content. Thank you, goodbye.